Hello, Earth! After the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik satellite in 1957, the Americans followed with their own Explorer 1 satellite in 1958. The obvious question was, when can we get a human in space? The history of people in space began in 1961, when the Soviet Union's Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space, here in a Vostok spacecraft.
Shortly after that, Alan Shepard became the first American in space. He was part of the Mercury program, and 5 other astronauts at the time flew in the Mercury capsule from 1961 to 1963. The purpose of the Mercury mission was to see if humans could survive in space.
During this time, the Soviets were also sending people into space. Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman in space in 1963. The Soviets also had the first 2-person crew in 1964.
At this point, the Soviet Union and the United States each wanted to be the first humans to land on the moon. This became known as the space race. Missions of increasing complexity were launched in order to see how well humans could function in space, and to help design the spacecraft needed to get to the moon.
After the Mercury program came the Gemini program, which was first launched in 1963. The Gemini spacecraft had 2 astronauts per capsule. Gemini's purpose was to see if humans could endure staying in space for long periods of time. One flight stayed on Earth for 2 weeks. Gemini flew 10 flights between 1963 and 1966.
Next for the Americans came Apollo. 3 astronauts flew in each Apollo spacecraft. The purpose of Apollo was to actually get humans to the moon. First Apollo flight, Apollo 7, was in 1967, when an Earth orbital flight to test out the new capsule. After 3 more test flights, Apollo 11 landed on the moon in 1969.
After Apollo 11, 5 more missions landed successfully and returned to Earth, with a total of 12 people walking on the moon.
The Soviet Union also had 3-person craft called Soyuz, which was first launched in 1967. Soyuz was able to dock several times with other Soyuz spacecraft in Earth orbit. Like Gemini and Apollo, the Soviet scientists hoped to use what they learned from Soyuz to design a spacecraft that could send people to the moon. But due to the various setbacks, the Soviet moon program never got farther than Earth's orbit.
Once Apollo 11 landed, the space race was over. But the Soyuz capsule remains in use to this day, and is used to send people from many countries to the International Space Station.
After the end of the space race, the Soviets concentrated on Earth orbital missions and in 1971 sent the world's first space station into orbit. It was called the Salyut, which means salute or fireworks. The longest crew to live in it was 211 days. The Soviets conducted scientific and medical studies aboard the Salyut.
In 1973, the Americans launched their own space station called Skylab. Three different crews of 3 astronauts each visited Skylab. The Americans also wanted to establish a true space station in which humans could live and work and produce meaningful science. Skylab was closed down in 1974.
Despite the politics of the space race, the astronauts from the 2 countries always got along. In 1975, the 2 countries had a joint spaceflight called Apollo-Soyuz Test Project, named after the 2 capsules. An Apollo spacecraft docked with a Soyuz capsule in space. And the Americans and the Soviets enjoyed being with and working with each other in space.
In 1981, America launched its first space shuttle. The shuttle was the first reusable spacecraft. Scientists were hoping that this would cut down on costs, as well as make spaceflight commonplace. Between 1981 and 2011, 135 shuttle flights flew into space. Yay!
In addition to the space research, the shuttles helped to assemble the ISS. In 1983, shuttle astronaut Sally Ride became the first American woman in space.
In 1986, the Soviets sent a new space station into orbit. Its name was Mir, or Peace. Mir cosmonauts conducted experiments in biology, human biology, physics, astronomy, meteorology, and spacecraft systems with a goal of developing technologies required for a permanent occupation of space.
In 1998, based on the cooperative efforts of many nations, the first parts of the International Space Station were launched into orbit. The ISS began hosting people in 2000 and has been continuously occupied ever since.
In 2003, China became the third country to launch its own manned space vehicle, the Shenzhou. Yang Liwei was the first Chinese astronaut. From 2003 to 2013, China sent 6 crews of both men and women into space. Liu Yang became the first Chinese woman in space in 2012.
Space travel has come a long way. The early days saw friendly yet political competition between two nations. 50 years later, many nations of many races and cultures are putting men and women into space to work together to achieve common goals. It's a good question. If we can work peacefully together in space, can't we do the same on Earth?